What's going on, you guys, and welcome to a very long-awaited review of the new 2023 Honda Civic Type R FL5. But you guys know me, no Honda performance car review would be complete without a comparison to my favorite Honda sports car of all time, the Honda S2000. So outside of just reviewing the FL5 today, we're going to take a look at whether or not that car carries the lineage of the all-time great Honda sports cars. In fact, the chief engineer of the FL5 was also responsible for the FK8 Type R that came before it, the O2 Plus NSX Type R, the Integra Type R, as well as the Honda S2000. So this is a bone stock 2000 model year AP1 S2000 with just over 60,000 miles on the odometer. Being an AP1, that means it has the 2-liter F20C engine, revs out to 9,000 RPM, makes 240 horsepower, and around 153 pound-feet of torque. Front, midship, rear-wheel drive, limited slip differential out back, and we're on some Continental Extreme Contact Sport tires, a fairly grippy summer tire. So once again, let's revisit the S2000. And it's only fitting that I wore my Honda shirt today. It's been a while since I hit 9,000 RPMs in an S2K. This car is lively in stock form. The rear suspension is really not forgiving at all. It wants to step out everywhere. Let's go! What an absolutely outstanding driver's car, even in bone stock AP1 form. Yes, it's not as confidence-inspiring as an AP2, but that's also what makes the AP1 more exciting than the AP2. It requires an even higher level of driver focus. The car moves around, it wants to dance with you, it wants to play. And that's why we love the AP1, even given all its drawbacks. Look, 240 horsepower in a 2,800 pound car and barely any torque. It's not a fast car by today's standards, but it's absolutely still one of the most fun to drive on a back road. Gotta love those perfectly rev match downshifts, cable throttle in this car, and the throttle response is absolutely perfect. The AP1 with its lighter flywheel just wants to rev so quickly. And this 6-speed manual, even today, almost 25 years after the S2000 was released, it's still the best gearbox in the business. This car is just so intoxicating. I love everything about it. The only drawback for me in terms of driving input is that the steering could have a little bit more feedback, but at least in the AP1 it does have a nice quick steering ratio. The car does feel a bit unsettled going over small bumps and larger bumps, but if you know what you're doing as a driver, you can manage that, you can control it. And this type of road is exactly where a car like the S2000 shines. The car doesn't have super high limits even with these modern tires, so you can explore the limit of the car in a safe and easy manner. but it's also an expert-friendly car. Even to this day, there are so many incredibly fast drivers out there who are setting hot laps in their S2000s day after day. And that's part of what makes this platform so special. It's unique in that it has such a hardcore community of owners who are really passionate about the way it drives. And I've seen a sliver of that same type of passion applied to the FK8 Type R. It's a very driving enthusiast-centric vehicle. And knowing that the FL5 Type R is largely an improvement of the FK8, that actually has me very excited. So with that said, let's hop into the FL5 and see if it carries the same ethos of driving pleasure that this AP1 S2000 still has in spades, even almost 25 years later. All right, so the FL5 Civic Type R. I've been so curious about this car ever since it was announced. Most of the changes made to the FL5 have been incremental improvements over the already very capable FK8 platform. But first of all, let's talk about the look of this car. Personally, I think the exterior is vastly improved over the FK8. I loved the front end of the old Type R, but the side profile and especially the rear just never looked right to me, and that was one of the major reasons why I never seriously considered buying one. The FL5 completely fixes that for me. The exterior is much less boy racer. It's a lot more toned down without being too subdued, in my opinion. We still have a big rear wing, we still have wide fender flares. The car is a little bit longer and wider, but also lower than the FK8. In person, I think it looks even better than it does in photos. Everything is cohesive, the front end, the rear end, the side profile, the 3/4. This car just, man, the styling is on point for me. But when you move on to the interior, it's even more impressive because just look at this thing. This is getting really close to a modern Mazda interior, in my opinion, which to me is almost like an entry-level luxury car in terms of build quality, fit and finish, choice of materials, as well as just overall design. I absolutely love what Honda has done with this honeycomb grille. Michael has swapped out the shift knob. The steering wheel is excellent to the touch. There's Alcantara on the doors. Just a really nice place to be. With that out of the way, let's fire this thing up and I'll show you guys the drive modes before we get going here. Finally, Honda listened and gave us an individual mode. So we've got comfort, we've got sport, and we still have plus R, which is the most aggressive setting, but we also have individual mode. And that allows us to customize all the different settings. So my setting right now is engine and steering and engine sound all in plus R. Suspension from the adaptive dampers is in comfort for this bumpy road. I have disabled rev match in the settings because I like to heel toe myself. A few specs about the car. It weighs just under 3,200 pounds, so it's slightly heavier than the FK8. It's got the same 2-liter turbocharged inline-4 engine. Now it makes an extra 9 horsepower and 15 pound-feet, 315 horsepower and 310 pound-feet. Now, let's drive this thing. Got a little bit of torque steer. Whoa. We're just on the OEM Michelin Pilot Sport 4S tires, and we've got Eibach Pro Kit lowering springs, which Michael said did not drastically change the suspension feel of this car. The car's only lowered about 0.6 inches, and the spring rates are only up around 10%. The suspension in comfort mode is still pretty stiff. The car moves around a lot. It's got a busy ride over the bumps. That corner exit traction is outrageous. It's even more impressive than the FK8 in that regard. Steering is good, this electric power steering rack, but it's not brimming with feedback. I would say it's a little bit more precise than the steering in the AP1 S2000, but at the end of the day, it's still an EPS. It's not the most feelsome thing in the world. Not a huge fan of this fake engine sound, so I'm actually going to turn that off. This seat is the best OEM seat I've felt in any performance car. It just holds me in so well while also being incredibly comfortable. A little bit of turbo lag below 3K. It's a pretty quick car. Some early dyno results show that this engine actually produces an additional 30 pound-feet of torque in the mid-range. It's certainly no high-strung, old-school VTEC engine like the one in that S2000, but still a very potent engine that likes to rev out to its 7,000 RPM red line. Oh! I don't think I've ever taken that high-speed corner that quickly in any other car. I was just flat out through there, and I've driven this road hundreds of times in many cars. That is impressive, the high-speed stability. Now the gearing of this transmission is a little bit longer than the older one. Now I'm gonna try something here. I'm gonna put the suspension into sport mode and dial back the steering from plus R to sport. I think the weighting in plus R for this steering rack is just a tad artificial. I don't think I need that much weight if it's not gonna give me more feedback. Torque steer feels about the same as in the FK8. Like right there. Woo! This car does jostle you over the bumps for sure. Sport mode I think is too stiff for this road. I'm gonna dial it back into comfort. After one corner, that was all I needed to know. In stock form, the FL5 has the same spring rates as the FK8, but they did retune the dampers to have a more aggressive damping curve. So what that means is this car does feel a little bit stiffer on a canyon road. However, I still think it's tolerable in comfort mode. Going over bumps, the car's not really getting upset per se. There's a little bit of extra vertical motion, but it never feels like it's losing lateral stability. And that's a great thing for driving confidence. This car feels just so capable. Hard on the brakes, amazing linear, progressive brake feel. I see what the hype is all about. I honestly do. This car is outrageously capable. It honestly might be the quickest I've driven this road in any car. I would leave that AP1 S2000 for dead in this Type R. And that's saying something considering this is my first time driving one and I've driven hundreds of S2000s. Oh, wow. This car is so good. It's so good. I would happily own an FL5 Type R. Even though I'm an FR junkie, I love my rear-wheel drive oversteer. But this thing is just stupendously capable. Look at the way it pulls. The acceleration feels about the same as the FK8 to me, even though the engine has an updated turbo and it produces a little more power and torque in the mid-range. It might be the extra weight of the car as well as the fact that this has a taller final drive, but the acceleration feels virtually identical to the FK8. This is one of the best cars I've driven all year, hands down. It's so incredibly capable, it's so confidence-inspiring, and it's just a joy to drive. So in a sense, yes, it does capture the ethos of the original S2000 to an extent. I mean, these cars couldn't be more different on paper, right? One's turbo, one's NA and high revving, one's FF, one's FR. One is 400 pounds lighter than the other, but it's not always about the on-paper specs. It's about how the engineers tune the car to feel subjectively. And that's something that can't be explained with numbers. And in that sense, this car really does embody the Type Rs and Honda performance cars of old. The confidence it gives the driver while also enabling the driver to play with the balance of the car. What you do with your right foot on the throttle, combined with your steering input, can change how the car responds during cornering. That's what I love to see in a performance car. The S2000 provides the same things but in a different way, a different flavor. That car is all about managing power oversteer and keeping the revs of the engine as high as possible. In this car, you got plenty of mid-range torque as well as top-end power, but you're really using the throttle to sort of trim your line mid-corner. Obviously, it's not going to power oversteer. So that's a nuance but it's important to bring up because I've always been such a rear-wheel drive junkie, but this FL5 Type R, as well as the previous gen FK8, these are really kind of the first modern front-wheel drive cars where I could actually see myself behind the wheel, more so in the FL5 because I just love how it looks. I love the interior refinement and build quality. This truly is one of the best cars I've driven all year. So big thank you to Michael for letting me pilot the FL5 Type R. Please follow his build at Michael Baxi Media on YouTube. Big shout out to Mihir for letting me pilot his Honda S2000. I'll link to his Instagram page in the video description. Thank you guys for watching. Let me know what you think of the FL5. Subscribe for more content if you have not already, and I'll see you guys in the next one.
Outside of driving Michael's Type R, I also had the unique opportunity to ask him about his rationale for buying one over the cheaper FK8, as well as his experiences thus far with tracking the FL5.
This is its owner, Michael. You're in a fairly unique position in that you owned an FK8 Type R, you tracked it extensively, and you've done a couple of track days with this as well. So we can definitely find out some of the differences, and you're a very fast driver. So first of all, tell me about why you decided to move from the FK8 to the FL5.
I think there was more of a midway point where the FK8 was, I'd gotten as far as I was willing to go on that platform, considering its limitations, that being things like the overheating and power-wise, things like the connecting rods and limitations with the transmission. I didn't want to go any further than the natural aftermarket would let me before tearing apart a transmission engine. So at that point, I decided I wanted to try a different platform. I actually went from the FK8 to the A90 Supra, which I still own and drive now. That has become my absolutely dedicated track car. I wanted to get back into a Type R, having a dedicated Supra for a track car. For a car enthusiast, I couldn't think of a better car than another Type R for daily use with 4 doors, back seats for the kids. 2 caveats with the FK8 that kind of pushed me towards the FL5. One being when I was looking at the used car prices for the FK8, for 21, which is really the year I was looking for because it had some changes to it that I didn't have in my 2018 FK8 that I really wanted, just from a daily comfort perspective. But when you saw the used car prices,
Didn't make sense.
It just didn't. No,
they were still going for like basically MSRP, or higher.
Oh no, well over MSRP,
like low 40s,
41, 42 for under 20, under 15,000 miles for a 21.
Yeah.
Granted, what I paid on the FL5 was more than that, but I didn't feel comfortable spending that much over MSRP for a used car that I've already had.
Right.
It still made sense to me to go ahead and spring for the FL5 rather than getting another FK8.
So let's also talk a little bit about your tracking experience with these two cars. FK8, well-known platform at this point. Lots of pros, lots of cons. You can track it in stock form and set a good lap time, but then your second lap out, there's a good chance it's going to overheat.
Yeah.
Not a whole lot you can do to fully remedy that in the aftermarket. There are obviously things you can do, but the people who added intercoolers, radiators, ducting, and everything still had some overheating issues. Supposedly Honda fixed those issues here with a slightly larger radiator, better airflow, but from accounts that I've seen, there still is an overheating issue. So what's been your experience on track?
I think you're on point with the FK8. Among other limitations, the cooling or the overheating was the biggest thing about that car for me and for a lot of people. It just got to the point where it just felt like no matter what you did, within reason, I think there are custom routes that you can go, but unless you're a weekend warrior welding stuff in your own garage, I just don't, it's not a realistic pathway for a lot of people to do that sort of thing.
Right.
On the FL5, what I'll tell you is the car got bigger, it got longer, and it got wider. The engine was actually also moved further back in the engine bay than it was in the FK8. So not only is there more space in the engine bay, but the engine has also moved further away from the front to allow for more space for where the cooling is needed the most. There is no overheating that I've seen right now. I would take it with a grain of salt because we're in the middle of December, actually end of December now in 2022. It's cold out. I mean, it's not cold for the rest of the country, but for us in California, a warm day is 50.
Yeah.
You know, and my track days have been around 45 to 50 degrees.
I mean, morning sessions at Thunder Hill, it's pretty chilly.
They're cold.
Yeah.
They're cold. Yeah. Sometimes they're in the high 30s. So if anything is overheating right now, that's a horrible, that's a horrible car design.
Honda completely failed.
Absolute failure.
The real test will be like spring, summertime next year, right?
Just based on my experience with the FK8, if it can survive a track day that's 75 degrees or warmer, I think you're winning.
Yeah, right.
I still think you're going to need help with the aftermarket, but my suspicion, at least my hope maybe, is that the same level of aftermarket commitment that you could put into the FL5 will net you a better result
versus the
FK8. Yeah,
because of those engineering differences that you mentioned.
Yeah, it's just physical dimensions.
If you guys want to follow more of this FL5 build, it's a dual duty track and daily build, would you say?
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, so follow Michael. He's at Michael Baxi Media on YouTube. Grid_Zilla.
Grid_Zilla. Yeah.
On Instagram.